Hey, Econ kids. This is going to be Module 72 and 73, so bonus for you. Um, Cost minimizing input combinations. We did a little bit of this in 71 where you're like, okay, well, how many of each thing do I buy, etc. All you do here, you're always trying to say, oh, I want to spend the least on everything, set them equal to each other. So we already talked about this. If you set the factors cost equal to each other, the cost minimization rule is marginal product of labor divided by wage equals marginal product of capital divided by rent. Remember, when you, if you want to change these numbers, make sure you get that marginal product number. If you want a smaller number, you have to hire more of something. If you want a bigger number, you have to hire less. So as you hire or as you do less things, produce less capital, if you will, hire less labor, produce less labor, that worker is going to be worth more than if you hire more labor. So just remember, it gets sometimes confusing when you're like, oh, I need this number to go down. Well, if you need that number to go down, then you probably need to hire like more people. If you need that number to go up, you need to hire less as you're trying to get those fractions to equal each other. Okay, not that difficult once you really think about it, but it's how that marginal product works. 73 is theories of income distribution. I think this is our last one, so woohoo. As you look at this, according to this theory, there are factors that come into play as you look at why some workers are paid more than others. When you think about compensating differentials, Chicago police officer is going to probably make more than a De Pere police officer. Why? They do the same thing. They're doing police work. Well, maybe the odds of you getting shot in Chicago are higher than the odds of you getting shot in De Pere. If that's the case and they can show that, right, then a compensating differential will be like, hey, you get paid more because you're putting your life on the line. Think about the COVID virus. If I am currently going to work, maybe I'm getting hazard pay for being a cashier in a grocery store, and I'm going to get paid a little bit extra because right now I might die doing my grocery store work, whereas before I never was worried about that. So sometimes people will get paid a little bit more. Remember, there is a backward bending labor supply curve like you have on the left where as you go from wage A to wage B, people are like, ooh, I really like that. I'm going to produce more hours for you, etc. But then as you get to C, you're actually like, you know what? I don't need to make any more money. That's the case. Differences in talent. If you think about a talented chef, if you think about a baseball player, a football player, sometimes those people can make more money simply because they have more talent than somebody else, right? You're more likely to go to this person's restaurant if their name's on the restaurant and there's someone famous. You're going to pay, Aaron Rodgers way more than like someone like a Mitch Trubisky who's just going to throw the ball to the other team. So as you look at it, that differences in talent does make a difference. I talked to a juggler once and I was at an event and I'm like, how much money you make? And he's like, you'll never believe it. And I said, oh, that little, right? And he's like, no, he made six figures. And I was like, what? How is that possible? And he's like, I'm a really good juggler and there's not that many like jugglers out there. So when people call for talent or, to do a show, they pay pretty well and I do a lot of shows. So as you look at it, if you're really talented, a lot of times you can get something out of that in terms of dollars. The last thing that will give you a lot of times different, wages, etc. Anything that gives you that human capital. We didn't get the chance to read the Naked Economics book, but in there it talks a lot about human capital, what do you have, and it's everything that makes you you. Charisma, your ability to go meet people, but it also is your education level. They did studies where they took people who were highly educated, threw them into like these terrible situations, and somehow they managed to make that situation functionable. But then they took some people who maybe weren't as educated, put them in that same scenario, and it was just like a disaster. So going to college or going to like a 2-year degree or whatever it is, there's something about going and saying to your employer like, look, I'm educatable. I took this class, I got this degree, I achieved this level of education. Maybe it's an internship. Maybe it's maybe you're in the trades and you're doing some kind of a thing there where you're apprenticing. Those kinds of things are going to be that human capital. Like, what can you do that makes you hireable for somebody else. And sometimes those people get paid quite a bit because they just have the ability to do something that somebody else can't. Um, I know some plumbers that make huge cash, and it's probably not that incredibly difficult to be able to take something apart and put it back together and clean it out, etc. But in the wrong hands, when your basement's flooded because you decided to try to do it yourself, better to call a professional, right? And that's just a flooding thing. Electrician, all of a sudden you try to do some electrical work and you have no idea what you're doing, and then that causes your house to burn down. Well, that's those people get paid a lot of money for a reason, right? Because they have a skill that maybe you don't have. Um, Last but not least, sometimes you have things like other income inequality for some reason. Sometimes it's a large group, like a union. Unions sometimes can raise wages for people that maybe don't really deserve it. Like everybody in the union kind of comes along for the ride. Remember, at one point in time, unions were actually beneficial to America. Like they stood up to the Carnegies and the Rockefellers, and everybody was like, yeah, union power. And then all of a sudden, something happened in the last, I don't know, 10 years maybe, where unions have become the devil and they try to root those all out. I think it's because probably people who, like business owners who don't care for unions raising wages, got the right politicians in office and then said, you know what, let's get rid of unions, which is fine. That's their prerogative. But at one point in time, people banded together and fought for things like the 5-day work week, or paid time off, or paid vacations, or the 8-hour work day. All those things were brought to you by unions. Now, can a union also protect somebody who is terrible at their job? Yes, they can. Is that good? No. But does it raise the wage for everybody? Is that good? It probably is. And oftentimes we don't realize, but unions raise the wage for lots of people in that field. Nurses are a good example. Some nurses are unionized, some aren't. Well, what happens is whatever that union sets the price at, that's basically what every nurse gets paid, because a non-unionized hospital will simply, like the nurses that are good, will go to the place that pays more. And then as one hospital is losing all its good nurses, they're like, whoa, 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 we got to pay them more. And the union wage is the one that prevails, even in a non-union hospital. Efficiency wages are another thing. Sometimes people are paid too much for the work they do. It's interesting when you can't, if you're, a factory is one thing where you're like, oh, look, we made this, and I can tell you how much this person is worth because they made this amount. Sometimes it's a person who does things that are not measurable. Having a really good secretary. Think about Leanne Allen in The Office when she helps people get to where they need to be going, and she takes care of stuff, and then all of a sudden it makes everybody's job in the office way easier. Mr. Joseph doesn't have to worry about like, oh, well, what about this and this, because Leanne does a good job. Or Carrie Guyette, like she works in the athletic office and might help arrange things, and then Mr. Bizik doesn't have to worry about like, well, where's the bus for this, because Carrie took care of it. Well, how much is that worth? Well, to the team that's waiting for a bus that's not going to come because somehow it got mishandled, that person's invaluable. So you might pay efficiency wages to somebody like that just because you don't know exactly what they're worth, or being able to calculate their wage is very difficult to do. Last but not least, discrimination. There's laws to try to prevent discrimination, but boy, that's difficult. Discrimination in the workplace, sometimes it's for someone who might be handicapped, sometimes it's for minorities, sometimes it's for women. It's out there, and when they talk about how much women make in terms of compared to men doing the same job and they make less, those are the kinds of things that we're trying to get rid of, and sometimes you need laws to do it. Where does some of that stuff come from? In the book, the Naked Economics book I referenced earlier, there's a story where a lady got hired, top of her class, Harvard Law School, whatever, and she got hired. She was working for a couple months and then got pregnant, and then went to her boss and said, hey, I got to take maternity leave. And then she basically worked for so many months and then had to take a break. And then it turned out she decided to stay home and take care of her child. And then the law firm a year later was basically in the same exact boat that it was in a year ago, because they hired this lady and now she quit. So now, same exact scenario, a man and a woman are up for the job, and the man was not as good of a candidate, but they hired him anyway because they're like, we got burned the last time. So when you think about like crap like that happens, and then all of a sudden you get people who are hiring, that shouldn't be looking at that, but have that in the back of their mind because it happened to them before. That's the stuff that's the negative. So can they discriminate like that? No. And there's laws to prevent it. At the same time, we're not saying it's not out there. That is the end of this section. I cannot imagine any of those topics really being on the AP test this year, but they're interesting to think about if you're into economics and you look at stuff like that. Lots of researchers do little things, and you can look it up. It's pretty interesting and exciting stuff. All right, with that being said, we are out, and talk to you later.